The studio lights blazed down as the moderator barely finished introducing the segment. Mitt Romney leaned forward, his trademark smirk already tugging at the corner of his lips. "Denzel," Romney said, voice sharp with condescension, "you're a great actor, but when it comes to politics, you're out of your depth. Don't you think it's better to leave serious matters to serious men?" The audience let out a nervous laugh, sensing the sting behind his words. But Denzel didn't flinch. He leaned into the microphone, eyes locked on Romney with the calm fire of a man who had heard this tune 1,000 times before. "You call yourself a serious man?" Denzel replied, his tone smooth but cutting. "Serious men don't sell their integrity every 4 years just to stay relevant. Serious men don't smile while the country burns." The crowd gasped. Romney shifted in his seat, caught off guard by the precision of Denzel's words. "You want to talk about depth?" Denzel continued, voice rising. "I've lived through what your policies only talk about. I've walked in neighborhoods your campaign ads pretend to care about. You stand on a stage and polish speeches, while people bleed for real." The studio erupted, half cheering, half booing. The tension was electric. Romney tried to recover, raising a hand for silence, but Denzel wasn't done. "You thought you could outsmart me," Denzel said, leaning back with a piercing glare. "But the truth doesn't need clever tricks. And right now, you look like a man hiding behind them." The moderator froze. The camera zoomed in. The fight had started, uncensored, raw, and impossible to look away from. Romney's jaw tightened, the smirk gone. He leaned forward, his voice sharpened like a blade. "You think quoting pain makes you a politician, Denzel? You're an actor. You rehearse lines. You read scripts. And now you're trying to play a role you don't belong in. This isn't Hollywood, it's reality." The crowd gasped again, some clapping, others jeering. Romney pressed on, sensing momentum. "While you stand here throwing words, I've actually passed laws, negotiated treaties, faced leaders who could crush this country if we blinked. You think you can match that with speeches and camera tricks?" Denzel didn't move. He let the words hang, his silence heavier than Romney's aggression. Then, with a slow nod, he spoke, his tone low, but every syllable cutting like thunder. "Reality?" Denzel said, leaning closer. "Reality is mothers working 2 jobs and still can't afford to feed their kids. Reality is soldiers coming back broken while politicians like you shake hands in front of cameras. Reality doesn't care about your treaties, Senator. Reality doesn't clap for speeches, it bleeds for action." The studio went dead quiet. Romney opened his mouth to reply, but his confidence faltered. Denzel raised his hand and pointed at him, not with rage, but with finality. "You call me an actor. Fine. But the difference is, I don't hide behind a role. You've been acting your whole career, Romney. Smiling on cue, talking on cue, pretending to care on cue. And tonight, your mask is slipping." The audience roared, some standing, some shouting Romney down. The moderator tried to step in, but the storm was too loud. The debate was no longer about politics, it was about truth versus performance. Romney's face flushed red, the calm mask shattered. He slammed his hand on the podium, his voice rising above the cheers and boos. "You don't get to lecture me, Washington. You've never been in the trenches of government, never had to make the impossible choice between war and peace. You stand there with your polished words, but you don't know the weight of real responsibility." The crowd erupted, half booing, half screaming support. The moderator's voice cracked through the noise, "Gentlemen, let's stay," but Romney cut him off, pointing directly at Denzel. "You've played leaders on screen, but when the cameras stop rolling, you go home. I don't get to walk away. I don't get to cut and reset. I've lived through crisis after crisis, while you sit in mansions and lecture the rest of us about pain." Denzel's eyes narrowed. He stepped away from the podium, closing the space between them. The room fell silent, as if everyone was bracing for impact. His voice was softer this time, but sharper than ever. You talk about responsibility, Senator? Then tell America, who signed off on the deals that stripped jobs from small towns. Who shook hands with corporations that bled workers dry. Who smiled at veterans during photo ops but cut their benefits behind closed doors. Romney froze, his hand still raised. Denzel leaned closer, his tone almost a whisper, but carried across the studio like fire. You don't carry the weight of responsibility. You carry the weight of excuses. The audience gasped, then a chant began. At first faint, then louder, shaking the walls. Denzel. 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 Romney looked rattled, his composure cracking as the crowd turned. He tried to speak, but the words tangled. The camera zoomed in. America was watching a career politician come undone in real time. Romney's voice cracked as he tried to regain control. You think you can shame me? You think you can stand there and pretend you know what it's like to govern a nation? You're nothing but an actor reading lines. I built policies, you built characters. He jabbed his finger in the air, but the crowd wasn't with him anymore. The chant for Denzel grew louder, shaking the studio floor. Denzel didn't flinch. He walked slowly back to his podium, placed his hand firmly on it, and locked eyes with Romney. His voice was low, steady, but it cut through the noise like thunder. An actor, he said. Maybe. But when I stand on a stage, people know it's a performance. They know it's a script. When you stand on this stage, Senator, people believe your words are truth. And that's the difference, because you've been acting for decades, and the cost of your performance isn't applause. It's lives. The room went dead silent. Romney blinked rapidly, his face pale now, his lips twitching as if searching for the right line. But there was nothing to grab. The moderator tried to step in again. Senator, let's, but Romney snapped, his voice shrill. No, he doesn't get to lecture me. He doesn't know the sleepless nights, the weight of compromise. Denzel cut him off with a single raised hand. You call it compromise. America calls it betrayal. The audience roared, half in shock, half in approval. Even the cameras seemed to lean closer, capturing the exact moment Romney's authority unraveled. His fists clenched, his jaw tightened, but the words wouldn't come. Denzel leaned forward, his tone soft, almost surgical. You tried to outsmart me tonight, Senator. But what the people see is a man trapped by his own record, his own choices. And no performance in the world can save you from that. Gasps echoed. Romney's face was red, his body trembling with rage, but his silence was louder than any outburst. And at that moment, America realized, Denzel had just flipped the stage. Romney finally snapped. His fist slammed against the podium, the microphone rattling from the impact. You arrogant fraud, he shouted, his voice echoing across the studio. You stand here with applause and pretty words, but you've never had to make the decisions that save or doom a nation. You don't know sacrifice, you don't know responsibility. The audience gasped, half in shock, half in anticipation. The studio lights seemed hotter, harsher, as if the very air was burning from Romney's fury. But Denzel didn't move. He just stared at Romney, calm, unshaken, his silence more devastating than any words. And then, with a slow breath, he leaned into the mic. Responsibility, he said, his tone low but razor-sharp. Let me tell you about responsibility. Responsibility is looking a grieving mother in the eye and admitting her son died in a war built on lies. Responsibility is telling a working man why his factory closed while you gave tax breaks to corporations. Responsibility is standing in front of America and telling the truth, even when it costs you everything. The crowd erupted in applause, drowning out Romney's protests. He tried to speak, but his words were swallowed by the wave of cheers, chants, and the undeniable momentum building behind Denzel. Romney's face turned crimson, his jaw locked in rage. You don't belong here, he bellowed, pointing a trembling finger at Denzel. This is politics, not theater. Denzel stepped forward, his voice thundering now, his eyes locked on Romney like a predator closing in. "No, Senator. This is truth. And the tragedy is, you can't tell the difference anymore." The studio froze. For a second, even time seemed to hold its breath. Romney stood frozen, cornered, his anger collapsing into silence. And in that silence, the balance of power shifted. The crowd wasn't with the senator anymore. They were with Denzel. Romney's breathing was heavy now, his knuckles still pressed against the podium as if it were the only thing holding him up. The camera zoomed in, capturing every bead of sweat on his forehead, every twitch of frustration across his face. He opened his mouth, trying to reclaim authority, but the words stumbled out, jagged and broken. "Why, you're just an actor. A performer. This isn't real life, Denzel. People don't need your speeches. They need leaders who..." Denzel cut him off with a sudden laugh, low, sharp, and cutting. The sound echoed across the room, silencing Romney mid-sentence. "An actor?" Denzel said, his voice rising like a hammer ready to strike. "You're right, Senator. I am an actor. And do you know the difference between me and you?" He paused, letting the weight of silence pull everyone forward in their seats. "When I stand on a stage, I admit it's a performance. When you stand in front of America, you pretend it's the truth." The studio exploded. Cheers, whistles, clapping, an eruption so loud that Romney's face seemed to collapse under the noise. He tried to wave them down, shouting, "That's not fair," but his words were lost in the tidal wave of applause. Denzel raised his hand, commanding the crowd back into silence. His gaze never left Romney. "You think this is about theater? No. This is about trust. And the truth is, you've been lying to this country so long, you can't even hear yourself anymore." Romney's lips trembled, searching for a comeback, but nothing came. For the first time in the night, he looked smaller, not like a senator, but like a man stripped of armor. The crowd chanted Denzel's name now, their voices booming like thunder through the studio. "Denzel! Denzel! Denzel!" And in that moment, Romney wasn't the politician in control. He was the man who had just been outplayed, outsmarted, and utterly dismantled on live television. The chants of "Denzel! Denzel!" shook the studio walls. Romney forced a smile, but it looked brittle, like glass ready to shatter. He gripped the mic, leaning forward with a desperate edge. "You think these people care about your speeches?" he snapped, his voice cracking. "They cheer now, but tomorrow, they'll forget your words. Leaders like me, we shape policy, we build nations. You just recite lines." The crowd hissed and booed, but Romney pressed on, sweat glistening under the lights. "I spent decades fighting for this country. What have you done, Washington? Played make-believe? Pretended to be a hero on screen while real men did the work?" The insult was sharp, deliberate. The audience gasped, waiting for Denzel's response. He stood still for a moment, hands flat on the desk, his eyes locked on Romney with a calm that felt more dangerous than anger. Then Denzel leaned into the mic, his voice low, every syllable slicing through the silence. "Pretend to be a hero?" His words dripped with quiet fury. "The difference between you and me, Senator, is that when I pretend, it inspires people. When you pretend, it costs lives." The studio froze. A pin could have dropped and echoed. Romney's face turned pale, his mouth opening and closing like a man searching for oxygen. Denzel didn't let up. He straightened, pointing directly at Romney. "You parade around with speeches about honor and service, but the people see through you. They see the hypocrisy. You wear patriotism like a costume, and when the cameras go off, you take it off. I don't have to play a senator to prove I care about this country. I live it." The crowd erupted again, shouts, stomps, and claps shaking the air. The moderator tried to regain control, but it was useless. Romney was crumbling, his authority slipping with every roar of approval for Denzel. Romney muttered into the mic, This is a circus." And Denzel, without missing a beat, shot back with steel in his tone. No, Senator. This is the truth, and it's about damn time you faced it. The moderator's voice trembled as she pleaded, "Gentlemen, let's stay on topic," but the crowd drowned her out, chanting Denzel's name like an anthem. Cameras zoomed in on Romney's face. The once composed senator looked cornered, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the podium as if it were the only thing holding him up. Romney suddenly lashed out. His voice cracked but carried venom. "You're not a leader, Washington. You're a performer who tricks the people with emotion. You can move an audience, but you can't move a nation. That takes policy, power, and intelligence, things you will never have." The words stung, and gasps filled the studio. For a moment, all eyes turned to Denzel, waiting. He stood motionless, his gaze steady, his silence more powerful than Romney's outburst. Then, Denzel leaned forward, his voice calm but cutting like a blade. "Senator, you confuse intelligence with manipulation. You confuse power with fear. And you confuse leadership with control. Let me tell you something, real leadership doesn't come from a seat in the Senate. It comes from standing with people when no cameras are rolling, when there's no applause waiting." The audience roared, clapping so hard it sounded like thunder. But Denzel wasn't finished. His tone sharpened, each word echoing like a hammer strike. "You call me a performer? Fine. I perform truth. I perform dignity. I perform the courage most politicians have forgotten. And if that shakes you, Senator, maybe it's because deep down you know, you're the one acting." The crowd exploded, half standing, fists in the air, the chant of "Denzel. Denzel," rising again, louder, stronger. Romney's face burned red. He slammed his hand on the podium, snapping, "This is a mockery of serious politics." And Denzel, with an almost chilling composure, shot back instantly. "No, Senator, this is what politics should look like when the people finally hear the truth." The studio lights seemed to flare brighter. The atmosphere wasn't just electric, it was volcanic. The line had been drawn. The moderator tried again, her voice nearly drowned out by the storm inside the studio. "Please, gentlemen, let's bring this back to..." But her words vanished under the crowd's chant. The room had transformed into an arena, not a debate stage. Every lens, every microphone, every heartbeat in the audience was locked on the standoff between Denzel Washington and Mitt Romney. Romney, sweating now, leaned into his mic with desperation. "Do you really think you can just shame me into silence, Washington? You think passion makes you right? It doesn't. It makes you dangerous. And the truth is, you're using that stage to manipulate these people. You're no better than the actors who pretend for applause." The insult hung in the air like poison. Gasps erupted. All eyes turned to Denzel. Would he flinch? He didn't. Instead, Denzel stepped closer to his podium, one hand pressing firmly on the wood, his bald head glinting under the lights. His voice dropped low, steady, and lethal. "Senator Romney. I don't need to manipulate anyone. They see through you all by themselves. The applause? The chants? That's not because I tricked them, it's because you failed them." The crowd erupted, the sound so loud the moderator flinched. Denzel raised his hand for silence, his gaze never leaving Romney. The hush fell instantly. "Do you want to talk about performance?" Denzel continued. "Here's the truth, you've been performing your whole career. Performing for donors. Performing for power. Performing for the cameras. And now, Senator, the act is over. Tonight, the mask slipped." The room ignited again, chants echoing like battle drums. Romney's face twisted in rage, he slammed both fists on the podium. "You're not a leader. You're a fraud," he shouted, his voice breaking. But Denzel only smirked, tilting his head slightly as if studying a man unraveling before him. "Fraud?" he said, his voice calm but devastating. "Senator, I've never pretended to be anything I'm not. Can you say the same?" The silence that followed was brutal. Romney froze, his lips parting, but no words came out. The camera zoomed in mercilessly, capturing every flicker of his struggle. The audience roared, sensing blood in the water. It was no longer just a debate. It was a dismantling, and Romney was standing in the rubble of his own words. The air in the studio had grown heavy, electric. The audience leaned forward, breaths caught, waiting for Romney to recover. But his silence stretched too long. Every second felt like an eternity, and every second belonged to Denzel. Finally, Romney stammered, "Why you're twisting everything. I stand on principles. On tradition. On faith." Denzel cut in, his tone sharp as a blade. "Faith? Tradition? Senator, don't use those words like shields. You stand on whatever keeps you standing in front of a camera. Principles aren't something you dust off for speeches. They're lived. And the truth is, America can see you don't live them." The crowd exploded, chants of Denzel, Denzel, bouncing off the walls. Romney's face turned crimson, his jaw trembling with fury. He pointed at Denzel, his voice cracking. "You think you've won because you've got the crowd? This isn't a movie. This is real life." Denzel leaned forward, both palms flat on his podium, his voice lowering to a dangerous calm. "Exactly. And in real life, Senator, men like you get exposed. The mask doesn't hold forever. And tonight," he gestured to the audience, the cameras, the nation watching. Tonight, they saw the man behind the mask. Romney's lips trembled, but he couldn't summon a response. The audience roared again, some on their feet, others chanting louder. The moderator tried to restore order, but it was futile. The energy belonged to Denzel. He straightened, adjusted his jacket, and delivered his final line with brutal clarity. "You tried to outsmart me, Senator. But the truth? You outsmarted yourself. And America just watched it happen." The studio erupted. Applause thundered. Romney stood frozen, fists clenched, unable to move. Denzel gave a small nod to the audience, then stepped back from the podium as if to say, "Debate over." The cameras captured the moment in crisp detail, Romney's collapse, Denzel's triumph. And as the broadcast cut to commercial, one thought echoed across living rooms, newsrooms, and social media feeds. Backhand index pointing right. Romney tried to outsmart him, Denzel made him look foolish. Romney tried to outsmart him. But in the end, it wasn't about politics, tradition, or speeches, it was about truth. And when truth walked into that room, Romney was left exposed. One thing's for sure, America won't forget the night Denzel made him look foolish.